Have you ever wondered where your intuition comes from? How every once in a while you can just sense when something bad is about to happen, or you just matrix dodge something without even looking? Well, I've got the answer for you, Sparky. It's the Force. Probably not in reality, but in this alternate scenario, that is what we're gonna go with. So I've never been much of a Star Wars fan, minus watching the hacksmith build real-life lightsabers, which I thought was the coolest thing in the world, but that changed a couple of months ago, and I started really getting into the franchise. So to celebrate my newfound love for Star Wars, I've decided to make a bit of a different video today than I usually do to celebrate International Star Wars Day. So if you're looking for a grounded history video, then come back next video when I release one, cause this is just a one-time thing. Until next year, maybe, if this video does well. So without further ado, let's get into the scenario. So for those of you who haven't watched The Phantom Menace, this one hippie basically explains that there's these things called midichlorians, which are microscopic life forms and all live in cells, and without them, life wouldn't exist, including the Force. Now, the Force comes from midichlorians and act as an energy field, and if someone has a high amount of midichlorians and is able to get proper training, then they can harness the Force and then learn to bend it to one's will over the course of their life. So for this scenario, let's just say that on May the 4th, 2026, a scientist is studying cells and then they discover midichlorians because they're so microscopic that they weren't able to be discovered until the time this video releases. After discovering midichlorians, it would be just like any big scientific discovery. The scientist that discovered it would write a paper and would release the discovery to the public, talking about this new cell that they have discovered, and the general public simply wouldn't care that much. But for the scientific community, this changes everything we know about biology. Immediately, biologists start finding the necessary equipment to start to study midichlorians, and that's where things start to get interesting. Over time, scientists start to see the correlation between midichlorians and the unexplainable human abilities we all have. At first, it just seems like we have found the answer to why humans have an intuition, but then, it's discovered that midichlorians can be manipulated by people to increase someone's intuitional capabilities, and then that's when things really start to change. America, Russia, and China would immediately start to classify research and start conducting their own research because they would fear that people may be able to potentially weaponize themselves, and more importantly, they could use it to weaponize other people. For a long time, world governments would keep their mouths shut about what's going on and would frame it as a national security measure, which is true, but this would also turn into another Epstein situation with people constantly questioning and putting pressure on the government on what's going on. Also, one other thing, you may be wondering why people haven't accidentally discovered the Force yet, and to that I say, I don't know. The chances of the Force being the reason why we have an intuition in real life is probably not the reason why we have it. So we'll just say that if you believe in the Force and you're taught by a master or someone who studied the Force to harness the Force, then you could harness the Force too. Other than that, all the other rules about the Force that were established in the Star Wars universe would stay the same. Behind the scenes, every major world power and their elites would start pouring millions into research, and once more information starts to be discovered, it soon becomes billions. Now in Star Wars lore, it's not simply enough to have a large midichlorian count. You need training, preferably at a young age, but you can theoretically learn it at older ages as well, like what Luke Skywalker did, but people wouldn't be able to be taught as well as they are at a young age. When the governments are doing research on the midichlorians, they are not just finding out what exactly midichlorians are, they are finding out how to train people to use Force abilities, which would start out pretty simple for the most basic training, which would be enhancing the Force abilities that most people naturally have, whether or not someone is Force sensitive. Now as for training, imagine you're someone that grew up in a rougher area. You'd be forced over time to develop your instincts to survive the environment you live in by learning various martial arts styles, and also just living a life having to watch your back all the time. That will lead you to over time being able to trust your gut when something feels wrong, sense when people are watching you, and develop really good reflexes. In this timeline, you'd be an example of someone who is Force sensitive, who has had extremely basic Force training through life experiences, but not nearly enough to gain any actual abilities. As researchers are conducting studies on humans, they would discover the correlation, and also that the higher the midichlorians someone has, the easier it is for them to develop these abilities. Eventually, as time goes on, scientists would have to replicate these high-stress scenarios in order to develop someone's Force-sensitive abilities. Many people would then leave once it starts to harm them, so the governments would then start finding Force-sensitive people and kidnapping them. In the public's perspective, they would still be in the dark years later, minus a few brave souls that would go against their governments to tell the people what information they know. They wouldn't know about the kidnappings though, because the scientists would have discovered it's better to train kids at a young age, so there were fake babies' deaths and children's kidnappings after they had been secretly given a test to find out what their midi-chlorian count is. Over time, the children that had been kidnapped would be raised by the government and would be experimented on in horrific ways to develop their force sensitivity. At first, they simply gain stronger intuitions, but eventually different training methods are created that lead to the more crazier force abilities like jumping high, healing, and telekinesis being discovered. And to stop people from escaping, everyone would be implemented with some sort of device or something that would easily be able to incapacitate them, like a really strong dog collar. As the government is experimenting on the kidnapped kids, the elites that would be funding the research would try to also gain force abilities from the methods found that do work to help gain force sensitive abilities. But because most of them are boomers, they either will be too old to gain any significant abilities or they won't be force sensitive enough to gain any abilities. That would mean that there would be some elites that are millennials that gain force powers, but the majority of the powerful force users would go to the elite's grandchildren, and throughout their childhoods, even as young adults, they would start to be trained in what would later be coined as the dark side of the force, since they would use even worse tactics than I talked about previously to secretly train their grandchildren. The reason why they would train their grandchildren in the force is mainly because of family prestige, which from my understanding, a lot of elites have. The problem with this is that even in our history, there are so many cases of powerful people gaining way too much power to the point where they get a god complex, which leads to them doing pretty insane things. Now imagine having people grow up training in the dark side of the force to gain the power to basically be all powerful, depending on how powerful some of these people can get to. Another problem is that because the dark side of the force would spread rampantly in the elite class, force users will be able to detect other dark side users, and just like happened in Star Wars lore, would endlessly kill each other for power. Once the dark side force users start to enter their teenage years, there would be many instances where they would kill people, even loved ones, out of rage, and as time goes on, they'll become more and more engulfed into the dark side, to the point where many will start to get Sith eyes, which they would need to conceal with sunglasses or colored contact lenses in order to conceal their identities to the public. Eventually, they'll want to gain more power and more influence, and many would want to come out to the world to show them their abilities, but would all be refused by their parents. As the Sith children grow up, their grandparents die, and their parents inherit their grandparents' empires. This is the system that the elites create for their children, and all it takes is one Sith to act out of line, which will inevitably happen. One day, a Sith kills their parents, takes over the company and fortune, and comes out to the world as a Force user, and after knowledge of the existence of the Force is shown to the world, many other Sith do the same. As time goes on, more and more elites die left and right, stocks plummet, many of the world's biggest corporations collapse left and right. In America, along with Russia, who would also be dealing with the same problem since they are controlled by oligarchs, would overnight cause the biggest economic crisis to have ever existed. Most Sith who are trained and managed to take over their families' companies for power, even if they have a force-sensitive parent, since they would have been trained at a much younger age. Those who stay loyal to their families start gaining monopolies over their industries, but for the most part, the world is screwed. With most of the oil companies taken over by the Sith, they wouldn't be able to properly run their companies, and a lot of companies would have their energy grids collapse overnight. And without electricity in the modern age, you no longer have a government and a country. Countries collapse, civil wars break out, and people desperate for food and water try to get it by any means necessary. Everyone has by now pulled out their money from every single company, even ones that weren't taken over by Sith Lords, because everything would have collapsed. After everything collapses, money will then be worthless, and the Sith would then try to gain power through other means. Throughout the chaos, the Sith would launch an Anakin-style coup on both the White House in America and the Kremlin Palace in Russia to take down their governments, and that would lead to both countries and their immediate spheres of influence collapsing, along with massive Sith civil wars breaking out in both countries. Now, lightsabers don't exist, but most of the Sith would have learned how to use telekinesis to block bullets and push people away so that regular people won't be able to hurt them, which would mean that when fighting each other, they would rely on hand-to-hand combat skills enhanced by the Force powers themselves, and regular weapons like swords for combat. The people would try to rise up against the Sith would immediately fail because they simply would be unkillable. Instead, the Sith would become warlords, and people would be forced to fight other people for the Sith warlord in order to get food and water, and also to not be killed by them. As for the Force-sensitive children that were experimented on, they would be broken out of their captivity and would become apprentices to various Sith warlords, or would go rogue, or would stay loyal to their fallen governments and form their own factions. While this is going on, there are two other countries that would have experimented with the Force. One is China. Now, China doesn't have an elite oligarchy class the way Russia and America does. Instead, from my understanding, they have a purely economic role, but the real power is still in the hands of Xi Jinping. Unlike in Russia and America, where true power is held in the elite class, where politicians have to listen to them. That means that China wouldn't have the same problem and wouldn't be in a civil war, but they would still be completely economically crippled because they wouldn't have any other countries left to export goods to. Since the Sith would now be revealed to the world, China would then use the Sith that would have been trained and manipulated at a young age to serve the Chinese government to put down any revolts that would happen due to the economic crisis, and to also invade and then annex Taiwan to control their microchips before it falls into anarchy, as well as to help the military secure key oil deposits in Russia and Central Asia, as well as other economically valuable outposts to help combat their economic crisis, as well as to shift away from having an export economy. All of those Sith would be led by the most powerful Sith leader, who would also have gained control over all of China after Xi Jinping dies. The only other country who would have been trained in Sith would be, of course, Israel. With the Sith being revealed to the world, they would use the Sith similarly to China to help them stabilize their country, but after the country is stabilized, they would then use them to rapidly expand by taking out Hamas and gaining full control over Palestine, while also expanding into the Sinai Peninsula. Not Sunni Peninsula, Sinai Peninsula. Sorry for getting that wrong last video. They would conquer the Sinai Peninsula and then capture the Suez Canal, since Egypt would most likely be severely weakened in this timeline and could even collapse with the help from the Sith Mossad. And last of all, in Lebanon, they would finish doing what they just started doing in real life and conquer the south up to the Litani River and help the Druze militia expand to create a buffer state against the collapsed Syria. So in other words, my what if everything went perfect for Israel video, but speedrun, and also included Lebanon pushing up to the Litani River. I was about to include that in my last video, but I didn't, and now I'm starting to regret not pushing back the video a day or two to edit that part in. Still watch the scenario though, I'm sure you'll love it if you hate Israel. Israel will annex all their gains, and as for other countries, they may have either developed much smaller and closely regulated force programs behind the scenes, would be prevented from doing so, or would be kept in the dark completely. Back in America, and Sith warlords would have taken over highly populated regions of America and Canada, and would continue to fight each other. A lot of Sith would attempt to build cult-like followings with the people under their control, and most will only be following them out of pure survival, since if they can't escape Warlord America, they would have no choice but to submit to a Sith warlord for protection against other Sith warlords and people. For those who don't join up with the Sith Lord, their survival chances are extremely low, and it's only a matter of time before they get killed one way or another. Within Sith Lord territories, they would find whatever Force-sensitive people they can find in their ranks and train them to fight for them, but ensuring that they still remain weaker than them so they don't rise up against them for power. Still, many instances still happen. Many new Force-sensitive people trained team up against their Sith Lord to overthrow them, establishing the first light side factions as well as the first light side philosophies. But of course, a lot of Force-sensitive people who have suffered a lot of pain from the Civil War would easily go to the dark side as well, but there would still be some light side users that would emerge that would find survivors and fight to restore America's democracy. In other factions, Sith warlords may be able to successfully create Sith armies. The Sith that would be able to do that would be much more powerful and would either be able to sense the Force much better compared to other Sith Lords to determine when Sith are lying, or would be able to predict the future to also find out when Sith are lying. Either way, those Sith Lords would be the most powerful and would rapidly expand across America, but they would face one major threat, and that's the light side powers. If light side factions are able to form successfully, then they would rapidly launch missions to recruit people who have been forced to fight for the Sith Lords, and would get them to fight on their side to restore America's democracy, which will make them become serious threats over time. While that's going on, in China, they stabilize as much as they can given the situation and adapt to the global economy collapsing. The new dictator of China steps forth and reveals the truth about the Force, and how he along with an army of people, have developed force abilities, and that the global order is now gone, and that China must reorganize into a Chinese empire. The dictator of China would declare himself Emperor Darth Qingchan, and would also announce that for the security of the empire, they must invade more foreign territories in order to bring peace, freedom, justice, and security to their new empire. Immediately after the emperor makes that shocking announcement, the Sith army, the Chinese army, and the Chinese Navy immediately mobilize, and the Sith army pushes into Central Asia, and they immediately capitulate to the Empire. The Chinese Empire then uses their new gains to push into Mongolia and Siberia, where they would have minimal activity within it, and then all their gains would be swiftly annexed into the Empire, making them the biggest land-based empire to have ever existed. After the Navy is mobilized, the most powerful Sith telekinesis users board the ships and with combined efforts start causing small tsunamis to happen by key port cities, which are able to kill most people, which makes it easier for naval landings to happen, which leads to the quick capitulation of North and South Korea, who ironically enough would go up fighting together as one. After they are then swiftly annexed into the empire, the Navy uses some of those same tactics to wipe out Japan, all of the islands throughout the Pacific Ocean and Oceania, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, while whatever's left of the Pacific countries form a coalition to stop the evil empire's expansion. Over in Russia, just like in America, its highly populated areas would get partitioned between Sith warlords, which after China's takeover would basically be the rest of Russia. Some light side factions would have also formed, and then as time goes on, there will be less and less Sith warlords as Sith gain more power in Russia and the collapsed countries around them, until eventually power in Russia will consolidate and the collapsed countries around them, until one Sith warlord faction is formed that is led by two brothers, who are also the descendants of Putin. You see, rumor has it that Putin has two descendants, one named Ivan, who would have been 10 or 11 when the Force was discovered, and another one named Vladimir Jr., who would have been 5 or 6 years old when the Force was discovered. And with their young ages, combined with Putin's KGB background, Putin called in many favors with his friends from the KGB to train his descendants before he died soon after some Force training methods were normalized. After Putin's death, the boys were taken in by a group of Putin's KGB friends, who then trained his descendants, not only in the way of the Force, but also by training them like KGB agents, which combined ended up helping them become some of the most powerful users to ever exist on Earth up to this point. When the Sith Civil War broke out, they fought together and raised their own Sith army using Force-sensitive Sith users, and trained them all using their superior training methods until eventually they successfully unified all of Russia. After they defeat every Sith user in Russia, the two Sith planned the future of their empire. Ivan, now known as Darth Putimus, has become much more engulfed into the dark side of the Force compared to his brother Vladimir Jr., now known as Darth Vladimirus Junius. During the Civil War, Darth Vladimirus Junius met the love of his life, which was another Force-sensitive person who he helped train in the dark side of the Force, which ultimately led to her death due to not being trained enough in time in the ways of the Force. That tragic event led to Darth Putimus becoming much more engulfed in the dark side of the Force, so when planning the expansion of Russia, he wants to immediately exact revenge upon the Chinese Empire for taking over Siberia and go to war against the Chinese Empire. But Darth Vladimirus Junius knows that that is suicide, and instead wants to consolidate power and expand their empire's influence westward before facing the Chinese Empire. Enraged by his brother's decision, Darth Putimus lashes out and attacks his brother, starting a battle that would be known as the Duel of the Fates. The fight is epic and devastating. I would show it to you, but I don't know how to make animations. But let's just say, chandeliers are broken, walls are teared down, Force abilities are used. But in the end, Darth Vladimirus Junius wins the battle, which ends the Russian Civil War, and Darth Vladimirus Junius declares himself by the new title as Emperor Darth Vladimirus Putinus Junius, and declares the rebirth of the Russian Empire. Swiftly, an army is raised. New Force-sensitive people are found and recruited into the Russian Empire's Sith army, and secret negotiations happen between the new Russian Empire and Israel, which would have by now reorganized themselves into the Israeli Empire, because just like what happened in China, their dictator died from old age and was replaced by the most powerful Force user created. They would decide to form a coalition to partition the Middle East between each other so that Israel can get their claimed Holy Land territory and Russia can get other valuable oil deposits. After the coalition is formed, The Arabs would immediately start getting their butts kicked because Israel would have built up an extremely large and powerful Sith army led by an extremely powerful Sith leader who is Benjamin Netanyahu's granddaughter, who would be an extremely powerful Sith Lord because she, along with Benjamin Netanyahu's other Force-sensitive grandchildren, if there are any, would have been taught methods that are a combination of every country's research on the Force thanks to the help of Mossad. In Egypt, the Israeli Empire rapidly expands into the Nile River and pushes down into it, and as they push down, they kill every single Egyptian living in the Nile as they go down, leaving nothing left. Yelnan Slayer 3000 could only dream of what the Israeli Sith would be doing in Egypt. Eventually, the Nile, where basically all of Egypt's population is completely ethnically cleansed by Israel's Sith army, and the only Egyptians left would have escaped into other countries, meaning all of Egypt would come under Israel's rule and would eventually be annexed into the Israeli Empire. Simultaneously, while focusing on Egypt, they would have also pushed up to the Kurdish regions of Syria, which would have broken away at some point after Syria's collapse. Saudi Arabia, whose army would already be in a severely weakened state after occupying the countries around it, who would have collapsed when the world economy collapsed, would also be screwed as the populations they took over would revolt as the Sith rapidly push in. Eventually, the Middle East is completely partitioned and they start to ethnically cleanse their conquered lands. Back in America, the Jedi are able to unite into one faction as the Sith continue to fight them and turn on each other, while the light side powers go on missions to free people from Sith rule all across America. The light side powers would also have help from all the South American countries after they get back on their feet, and when the Sith discover that, they then secretly train the most powerful cartel members they could find that were also Force sensitive, which would then lead to the first Sith cartels being formed all across South America. And with their newfound power, they would rapidly expand over time and would begin to wage war against other cartel groups to monopolize global drug control. These Sith would quickly become extremely dangerous. Just imagine a Sith on crack cocaine and steroids, and you could probably imagine the damage that they could do. This will lead to the light side powers losing funds over time from all of South America because they would have bigger issues to deal with. They would still get funding from the EU, which would have expanded to all the European countries, and would also act as the new NATO, which would be led by the Jedi Order to deter the Russian Empire, who would be ethnically cleansing their lands and annexing some into their empire. Through all the chaos of the rise of the Sith, the European Union would have gotten more and more power delegated to it, so that way, all the countries of Europe would be able to give and take resources from each other whenever needed in order to prevent the continent from collapsing, as well as helping to establish a unified European army to counteract the growing threat of the Russian and Chinese empires. Light side Force users in America begin to share their training with the Force-sensitive Europeans, which leads to the creation of the first Jedi Order in Leningrad, which would have broken away from Russia during the Civil War to form the first light side country. In this Jedi Order, light side tactics and philosophies are created and adapted much quicker than the Jedi fighting against the Sith warlords in the American Civil War were able to. The Jedi Order in Europe quickly became the keepers of the peace there, and also found out about the corruption of the elites that controlled the EU and the countries of Western Europe, and helped convince the people to rally against them to take over the EU and take back power in their respective countries. The Jedi Order helped the people re-establish their countries and establish a new EU, while also creating the necessary reforms that the EU has needed for decades, and also expanding the EU to all other free European countries as I mentioned earlier. And as the Civil War rages on in America, and the Russian and Chinese Empire grow in power, the Jedi Order calls for the European people to set aside their differences and unite to create a Republic of Europe. The Jedi would be very popular because many people's lives were changed, because before the Jedi Order rise, Europe was in a very bad state for a long time, but after the Jedi Order rise, they changed everyone's lives and helped to prevent the collapse of Europe, as well as many of them selflessly going on to fight on the side of the Jedi in America. Many people would also have started embracing Jedi philosophies into their lives, one of which being begun in different cultures with respect, empathy, and the belief that all life is one and interconnected through the Force, and that they should serve and protect the people. As a result, Pan-Europeanism would have soared a lot over the years, which then leads to the Republic of Europe being officially formed. The Republic of Europe, after fully forming, brings much more wealth to the Republic, which they use to then fund the Jedi in America, which leads to them kicking all of the Sith out of America and Canada, and then joining the Republic of Europe to form the United Republic of Terra. In Latin America, the Sith drug cartels would have been duking it out with other Sith drug cartels, until eventually, one Sith cartel would be able to unite all of Latin America under one Sith cartel empire. This new empire would bring a new golden age to the drug industry, as many people in countries that would have collapsed would want an escape from the miserable lives through drugs. They wouldn't, however, try to conquer the New Republic, since they already would be severely overextended, unifying all of Latin America, and they would just want an ethnic Latino race dominating their country, as well as a monopoly over all the world's drug control. Moving back to the Chinese Empire, they would have over the decades conquered all of the South Pacific, as well as Iran, Afghanistan, and some parts of India, and would have been focusing on ethnically cleansing all of their conquered territories, which would be a very big task because of the large population of people in the South Pacific. But they would manage to successfully cleanse out all the Pacific islands they have conquered, as well as Japan and the Philippines. After the Republic stabilizes, they would then start to form rebellions all over China's conquered territories, while simultaneously the Russian Empire would wage war against the Israeli Empire, because the Russians wouldn't be able to expand into Europe with the formation of the Jedi Order, so they would need control over North Africa to be able to launch a full-scale invasion into southern Europe, which would start with invading Israel. After the Republic consolidated its influence, they would wage war on the Russian and Israeli Empire to liberate the Arab populations from their rule, which will lead to the Chinese Empire joining in on their side to prevent the Jedi from fully winning, as well as the drug cartel empire in Latin America to take control over all the Americas now that they have consolidated much more over time. With all the fighting between the Jedi and the Sith, which has now led to the beginning of the Third World War, the two sides have drawn the attention of many groups of Jedi and Sith orders that have formed throughout the galaxy. Contact with these groups has been secretly made, and when the Third World War breaks out, they call upon the alien allies they have made contact with to support them in the last war for terror in a fight between light and dark. And that is where I'll end this scenario for now. Thank you all for watching this video, and let me know in the comment section what side do you think will win. I know it's quite a different video from usual, so I hope you guys like the scenario. I really love this kind of storytelling, and hopefully the video will turn out good. I know this timeline was probably pretty confusing because I'm jumping all over the world and covering decades of war, but maybe one day I could try to do more of these storytelling mapping videos in the future if you guys want. But until next time, don't forget to like and subscribe, and turn on notifications if you haven't, and don't get anyone pregnant, but if you do, make sure they're hot, and I'll see you all next time.